Hello, welcome back to Psychology 230. We're going to do a quick review of Chapter 13, Emotion and Social Cognition. Here you see the major structures of the limbic system. Remember, amygdala and the hippocampus, the mammillary bodies, and the hypothalamus, as well as the fornix, the parahippocampal gyrus, the olfactory bulb, and the anterior cingulate cortex. This is just a brief overview of the autonomic nervous system, the organs that are affected, the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal cortex, the amygdaloid complex. Notice the thalamus and its location in this brain section. An example of fear conditioning we briefly went over. There's two pathways by which sensory information reaches the amygdala. We saw that fear comes through the visual stimulus through the thalamus and then is inputted into the amygdala through the visual cortex, and then you have a flight or fight response. The location of the nucleus accumbens we briefly went over. Cingulate cortex is involved in cognition and emotion. You can see the brain regions located here. The orbital frontal cortex, seen right here, named because of its location. And facial recognition, different emotions that are typically recognized in emotions. Patients with amygdala damage look at faces differently than neurologically intact individuals do. Notice here on this side, they'll look at the eyes, the nose, the way the mouth is shaped, and on this side they look at it differently. Symmetry. Areas of the right hemisphere that, when damaged, lead to difficulties in perceiving or producing emotional prosody. The motor region. Remember the motor strip and sensory strip right here. So now we're going to go into psychopathology after that brief overview. And in this slide, it's basically a table that's pretty straightforward about the symptomology of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia affects 1 in 200 people according to the World Health Organization. There are positive and negative symptoms, which can get confusing. For example, hallucinations are positive symptoms, while delusions may be negative. It is an excess and deficit of normal behavior. In this next slide, you'll see enlargement of the ventricles in schizophrenia. Notice where the arrows are pointing. These are the ventricles. This is caused from global brain atrophy. Notice that there's a shrinking of the cortex. Many scientists believe that the brain continues to atrophy in schizophrenia patients and thereby continues to have an ongoing pathological change in the disease. In this next slide, you'll see that reduced gray matter volume in schizophrenia is shown with the different color regions. In this slide, yellow is the most reduction. So you'll see here, remember in the overview or the quick review that we just did, there was the the orbital region. The yellow is the most reduction, followed by orange and red. So where these locations are yellow is where there's the most reduction. And the temporal lobe has quite a bit. And most likely has something to do with hallucinations, which are a positive symptom of schizophrenia. Something to remember for the test or quizzes. Additional areas that continue to degenerate quickly over time include the left planum temporal and Herschel's gyrus. So, on this next slide, you'll see the risk of developing schizophrenia, and in the chart it shows heritable schizophrenia, how heritable schizophrenia is. Basically, if you have an identical twin, you have a significant chance of also having schizophrenia. Two parents, almost as much as having a twin with schizophrenia. And it goes down the further away that somebody in your family has schizophrenia, and then this is just the general population. So this shows you that there is some type of genetic component related to schizophrenia and the incidence of it. Scientists have also found several clues to the cause, including COMT and dopamine. So these genes that they're sequencing may have some insight into understanding the incidence and the heritability. In this slide is the subgenal region of the prefrontal cortex implicated in depression, this area here. And the region is more active in patients with depression, and activity is reduced when patients receive therapy. Scientists are not clear as to how this area functions in depression, but the area is connected to the hypothalamus and the insula, and stress response and bodily states. So the hypothalamus with stress response and the insula with bodily states. In this slide, there's novel treatments for depression. Some are invasive but potentially effective treatments for depression. In image A, it shows repetitive magnetic stimulation of the region of the brain responsible for depression, whereas image B shows an electrode implant that signals shutdown of the subgenal cingulate cortex that we showed you earlier, and it reduces the activity of this region, little purple almond-shaped area of the brain located right here. And in image C, it shows a coil electrode connected to the vagus nerve wrapped around it, and is a pulse generator to reduce stress-related responses. Remember how we talked about stress earlier with the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axis. In this slide, the basal ganglia are abnormal in obsessive compulsive disorder, and persons with OCD tend to have an increase of activity in the basal ganglia. It's important for initiation and stopping of movement. Persons with OCD will tend to repeat actions when anxious, like closing doors or drawers, or using light switches several times. Another area of potential deficiency includes the orbital frontal cortex, which is implicated in reversal learning. And that's this region right here, right above the eyes. And reward pairing may cause repetitive actions like hand washing to receive a reward in mice models of OCD. So that brings us to a conclusion. I want to ask you several questions in regards to what you've learned. So what concept did you find most interesting about this presentation? What concept did you find least interesting? And one or two questions you want to ask, as well as how you prepared for the midterm and what you plan to do differently for the final. And here we're just going to talk a little bit about Bloom's taxonomy. Recall facts. Remember some of the things that I've given you in your study guides are some facts to recall, terms and locations of the anatomy of the brain, given some general understanding of it. I want you to apply, using this psychopathology, what regions of the brain are affected. Analyze what symptoms, what are some key symptoms that they're dealing with in these psychopathologies, and evaluate. Uh, give yourself a few questions of how you think it'll be asked on the test, and have some ideas of the current research and what gaps are in the research as budding psychologists, and what you think you will come across in the future. Thank you.